There are some people that really need help.
Dollars are scarce, but we fund our values.
When the COVID pandemic hit a year ago, many families got relief through federal stimulus checks, food stamps, and unemployment insurance. But undocumented workers did not qualify for this help.
These community members have been paying into these systems without seeing any of the benefits.
And I know it's going to help a lot of Washingtonians.
The state is allocating millions in federal dollars to help undocumented workers. But some lawmakers say a short-term fix is not enough.
There is a need to update our safety net.
Will legislators support a permanent fund to help the 270,000 undocumented workers in Washington?
People need help now.
Our panel weighs in.
COVID has just shown the inequalities in the system even more.
An economic recovery plan for the undocumented. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. A new $2.2 billion COVID relief bill in our state will help millions of people recover from the pandemic, including undocumented workers. $70 million from this measure is set to go towards undocumented people in our state, people who have not had access to federal stimulus money or unemployment insurance. Advocates say this new investment establishes our state as a leader for a group of people whose residency status has kept them in the shadows. But those same advocates are concerned the relief bill is just a temporary response to larger questions about immigration that will continue in our state and country for many years to come.
And I know it's going to help a lot of Washingtonians.
When Governor Jay Inslee signed a $2.2 billion COVID relief measure into law on February 19th, he was giving a boost to millions of people in our state, including Ramon.
We need to pay the rent every month.
Ramon is an undocumented worker. He's a college graduate who legally came to the U.S. from Venezuela with his wife and daughter nearly 20 years ago, at a time when Venezuela was going through political turmoil.
Back to our country is not an option. We didn't want to be undocumented. The problem is that there was no path to solve our problem.
He was doing okay as an Uber driver at the airport till the pandemic hit. For now, he's scraping by delivering food and says the state's latest COVID relief effort, with $65 million for undocumented workers, will be an important safety net for many who share his immigration status.
They have no income at this moment. They need desperately any type of help.
Advocates say Washington has 270,000 undocumented workers, and studies show nearly 70% of them are essential workers in the fight against COVID.
My whole family got sick, including my children.
State lawmakers are hearing their stories as they consider legislation that might go even further to help undocumented workers who are not eligible for federal stimulus money or state unemployment insurance.
These community members have been paying into these systems without seeing any of the benefits.
Joseph Lachman is a policy analyst for the Asian Counseling and Referral Service in Seattle, which helped distribute $40 million in federal CARES money to undocumented workers last year via the Washington Immigrant Relief Fund.
It's difficult to get relief to people quickly and efficiently.
Lachman says his agency was able to help about 38,000 immigrants with $1,000 apiece, but more than 200,000 applied for help.
And many have not had access to the safety net that all of us build together when any of us falls on hard times.
That's why Lachman is pushing for more permanent help, as found in Senate Bill 5438, a $350 million state program to provide undocumented workers unemployment benefits, similar to those of people who have legal resident status.
Immigration status should never be the deciding factor in whether or not children are able to have food in their stomach.
A permanent state fund to help undocumented workers with unemployment would be a first for our country. And bill sponsor, Senator Rebecca Saldaña, knows it.
In terms of this remote session, it is a challenge.
If her bill doesn't make it to a vote, Saldaña is hoping to include it as a budget proviso to prevent federal immigration status from stopping what she says our state desperately needs.
If federal government isn't going to be a partner with us because they put limitations on us, then it's our job as government in the state of Washington to be able to come up with solutions.
Representative Mia Gregerson, co-chair of the House Appropriations Committee, which deals with the state budget, says bipartisan support for the COVID relief bill shows lawmakers believe helping undocumented workers will help all of us.
We know it works. We know money in people's pocket is working.
But there's a tough road ahead.
Who pays for the benefits?
Beyond funding issues for undocumented worker assistance in our state is a decades-old federal policy battle over immigrants that became a lot more intense in the past 4 years.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
So these 4 very toxic years is a very complicated situation to talk about that.
Gregerson says the state's efforts to help undocumented workers will continue.
Dollars are scarce, but we fund our values.
But our nation's struggles over immigration put those efforts and families like Ramon's in a challenging position.
Until we have good comprehensive immigration reform, so many people in our community just aren't even given the chance.
And joining us for an important discussion on these issues, we have with us Paúl Quiñonez Figueroa. He is a former DACA recipient and co-founder of the Washington Dream Coalition. We also have with us Alizeh Bhojani. She is policy manager of the immigrant advocacy group OneAmerica. Thank you both for joining me here. And Paúl, I want to start with you. The pandemic has hit all of us hard, but especially the 270,000 people in our state who are undocumented workers. These workers have not been able to access federal stimulus money or state unemployment insurance. Your group raised a lot of money for this community early on in the pandemic, and there's been some funding from other sources too, but the need is definitely better than the resources right now. So give us an idea what the pandemic experience has been like for undocumented workers in our state, and how are they getting by?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been really difficult. We saw that early in the pandemic, our community was really having to rely on each other, on help that places of worship could provide, and on mutual aid efforts. It took a long time for the government to act, and that's why we launched our grassroots fundraiser and were able to get limited funding. So it's been really hard for undocumented people. I know it's been hard for everyone. We see more people than ever having to rely on food banks, being at potential risk of eviction once the moratoriums are lifted. So if you can imagine that difficult situation that all of us have been in while having legal status, it's only harder for undocumented people who have literally access to almost no government benefits and are having to rely on the charity of their neighbors, their relatives that are maybe better off. And that's really the experience that our undocumented community has been having.
Yeah, thank you for that. Alizeh, let me go to you next. I want to talk about what OneAmerica's role has been when it comes to helping undocumented workers, because I know that immigrants, undocumented workers especially, can have a difficult time in trusting programs, even those that are meant to help them, and likely even more so after 4 years of America First policies from the Trump administration. Has it been difficult to connect with these workers, or what has that outreach effort been like for OneAmerica?
So our organizers are great, and they've been on the ground talking with folks, getting, building relationships and leveraging existing relationships to get aid out to folks, get information out to people. And you're totally right. There is a deep distrust, particularly in the last 4 years. And remember, the pandemic hit during the Trump administration. So people just didn't know where to go, were really scared of public charge in particular, and how asking for aid or accessing aid would impact their ability to maybe one day apply for citizenship. So yeah, it's been hard. We've been doing community outreach efforts, talking about public charge, working in a coalition with organizations like Paúl's.
Yeah, it's all part of this here. And Paúl, maybe I can go to you next on this, because I think this really speaks to a stigma that has existed for many years across the U.S., that undocumented workers are somehow a drain on our economy or on government resources. How do you respond to questions like, and I'm bringing this up for the course of this discussion only here, why are we spending so much effort and money on undocumented workers? That line of thinking, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think the pandemic, more than any experience we've had, has shown us that our safety and even our economic well-being is really interconnected to the safety, health, and economic well-being of our neighbors. So our undocumented workers are workers contributing to state, local, and federal taxes, our business customers. They support and spend money that keep our small businesses afloat. And if they have money, they're able to help the recovery move along faster. And also, they are people that are integrated in our community that we interact with, are part of our churches, are part of our schools. And so if they are healthy, we are able to stay healthy. And we know that our state cannot recover unless we're all taken care of. And that's why it's really important that we acknowledge that, and that we acknowledge that they've actually been paying into these investments and they're just not able to access the benefits. So it's not at all a favor, if you want to look at it, that we're doing for people. It's just common sense.
Yeah.
And I can jump in and
yeah, I was going to say, please, yeah.
I can jump in and say that we have estimates that show that undocumented workers have been paying around $400 million in contributions just to state and federal unemployment taxes in the last 10 years in Washington state. And that does not include additional sales and property taxes.
Yeah, that's a lot there. And I just think about that, Alizeh, because OneAmerica was founded right after the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened almost 20 years ago to deal with the problem of discrimination against people of color, against immigrants. Do you sense that stigma that I was talking about with Paúl there when you do the outreach that you do with OneAmerica?
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to some of the facts and statistics we have, right? In Washington state, Pacific Islander and Latinx folks are the ones who are seeing the highest rates of hospitalization due to COVID. We're also seeing the lowest rates of vaccination, also for communities of colors, which are the hardest hit. Furthermore, undocumented workers are both in industries that are essential fields and the ones facing the highest rates of layoffs. So you can see that there is a squeeze from every end, and that discrimination and stigma is coming from every end. And that relief is a moral dilemma, right? And it's something that our politicians need to stand up and say, you know, if you support equity, then this is the place to do it.
Let's talk about this and move on to some of the ways our state has been trying to help undocumented workers over the past year. So last spring, federal CARES Act money came into our state, but it wasn't until late October that the governor opened up applications for the $40 million Immigrant Relief Fund. Another $26 million in CARES 2.0 money came in December. That money's getting distributed right now. But Paúl, I'm thinking about last fall. Immigrants' rights groups like yours were really scrambling to get money out the door before the deadline to spend it before the end of last year. What was that process like? What lessons have been learned when it comes to finding better ways to distribute that money?
Yeah, we were scrambling. I think the difficulty, the need was there. We actually, in the 2 months that the application was open, had over 94,000 people apply, which is tremendously impressive that we were able to get the word out to 94,000 people so they knew that this resource existed. They were able to trust it. As you said, getting people to trust a system is often an issue. I think we learned that we need more time. We needed time to build the technology, the adequate outreach tools, communications tools to reach out to these communities, to make sure that we're reaching maybe people that it takes longer for them to hear about this. And maybe there have been people that have heard about the fund since it closed back in December. And that's why we're pushing for additional investments. And we've also learned that we need bureaucracy to be more flexible. State contracts implement on a reimbursement basis, which made it difficult because we have the people that need the money, we have the infrastructure to give out the money, but we were unfortunately, there was about a reimbursement schedule where we could only get out 8 million at a time, get that money reimbursed and then help out. And 8 million sounds like a lot, but 8 million was only enough for 8,000 people. So it really slowed down the system and people need help now. The people that have applied since last year and we haven't been able to help yet because there wasn't enough funding, they've been waiting for a year. So just getting bureaucracy to understand this and getting them to be as flexible as possible, I think is a good lesson that we've learned. But also we've learned that we do have great small grassroots organizations throughout the state that are ready to do the help, that are ready to help us get the word out and that have the trust of their communities and that we should rely on them as trusted partners. And we also learned that the AAPI community is actually the second largest population that makes up our undocumented community after the Latinx community. And we didn't get as much participation there. So we learned that we have to be able to support small grassroots organizations, build up their capacity and infrastructure. and making sure that we're doing a better job of reaching out to that community so they know that this is also available to them, and understand it's a complicated issue. It's much more of a taboo issue in certain communities than in the Latinx community, that whenever people think about undocumented people, that's what we think of, but we need to make sure that everyone is served.
Yeah, a complicated issue to be sure. And Alizeh, maybe I can have you weigh in on this, because what I'm hearing from a lot of different social service groups is this next round of funding, as we start talking about this going to immigrants, undocumented workers, the hope is the state will take a much larger role, I guess, in administering that aid there. Is that about right? I just want to talk about that before we get into what this new money from the state could be doing here this year. Do you think the state needs to do more to help distribute money to people in need?
Yes, the state does need it. That's the role of the state, right? That's the government role, is the contract with the people to serve the people. And that includes undocumented folks who are the backbone of Washington's economy. And as Paúl said earlier, are our neighbors, are members of our churches, of our community and religious organizations. So yes, the government needs to take a stronger role. And then, our community organizations are here to do that partnership with the government, to do that outreach, to build those trust so that people are applying and are engaging.
Right. A lot of different communities to reach out to. Paúl, I'll go back to you. So the governor just approved this new $2.2 billion COVID relief plan, releasing federal aid money to our state. $70 million of that is set to go towards undocumented immigrants, $65 million for workers, $5 million for students. What will this money actually do? How will it be spent?
Yeah, so I think the 5 million is another question that's being resolved by people in the educational system. The 65 million, there's still about 20,000 people that applied that didn't get the help. They qualified, their applications have been vetted, but we didn't have enough money to support them, so they haven't been funded. So they'll be the first priority. About 20 million will go out to those people so we can get their money as soon as possible, so they can also get that one-time $1,000 payment. And then the rest, we are seeing that those of us with documentation have received 2 rounds of stimulus checks, and we know that $1,000 is not enough. So we're going to go back to all about 80,000 people that would have been approved by that time and issue a second payment to all of them. We won't know the amount of that second payment until we know how much money is spent for sure in the first remaining applicants. Even though they qualify right now and their documentation has been vetted, there has to be an additional final vetting, and so it may be that less people get approved. But our hope is that we're able to finish approving everyone and issue a second payment so everyone can get a little bit more support.
Thank you for that. And Alizeh, I'll ask you just your take on where and how this new funding for undocumented workers will be going, and also what happens when that money runs out. I think there's a lot of questions around that too.
Yeah, I think Paúl did a great job talking about what we're going to be doing with that 65 million. So I can focus on what's next. The other thing that our coalition has been pushing for is unemployment, and having some sort of unemployment system set up that includes undocumented workers. So the way our current employment system works is that employers do pay in for all of their employees, regardless of their immigration status. And so that money is going into the fund and is inaccessible for undocumented workers because of their immigration status. And this is an injustice that has existed long before the pandemic. And so the time really is, COVID has just shown the inequalities in the system even more. And so now is the time to push for that. And that's what we are working on and hoping to have a bill next session for a permanent unemployment program.
Yeah, and Paúl, let's head into this, what Alizeh is talking about here. There's a bill this session that Senator Saldaña had been working on. We're talking about Senate Bill 5438 to create this more permanent unemployment relief fund for undocumented workers. The bill didn't make it out of committee, but the senator says she is going to try to keep it alive as a budget proviso this session, so we'll see where that goes. I'm talking about this because it's one of the it would be the first of its kind in the country, and a $350 million price tag is nothing to blink at either. What do you think the legislature is going to be able to achieve this session with this when it comes to establishing a more permanent way to help undocumented workers?
Yeah, we've actually worked with Senator Saldaña to submit that budget proviso, and so we know it sounds like an overwhelming figure, but we need to be bold. We cannot recover if people don't get the support that they need and the investment that we need. I think that's a lesson that we should have all learned from the last recession, that we cannot recover with austerity measures. And so this is the level of commitment and investment that our community needs it. And it's so large because they've been excluded for so long. And so we are submitted that budget proviso. We know that it'll be difficult to administer maybe something as close to unemployment that's weekly benefits, but people cannot wait. So while we figure out those questions, those answers to those long-term questions, we need to provide support that's as close to unemployment as possible. So we're putting together proposals about maybe quarterly payments that are more significant lump sum, so we can get close to what a person would have received through that quarter if they were in unemployment, which would be about 400 and something a weekly payment, and doing that in lump sums. And so that's why it takes $350 million, and that's why the budget proviso it's still for that long. So I think, as Alizeh said, legislators have said that they're committed to equity, they're committed to recovering from COVID, they're committed to Black Lives Matter and to the movement for Black lives. We know that Black undocumented immigrants are impacted at a greater rate than the rest of the undocumented population. And so if this doesn't address all three things that they have themselves have said is a priority for them, then I don't know what is. So we just need to have the political will to make the investment that our community deserves and needs. And so we're working with members of both caucuses so they are able to shore up that support and make that investment at the $350 million level, or as close as possible, not at anything lower.
Yeah, and Alizeh, I'll go to you next, because I look at this and I think we all know that efforts like this, these are big projects we're talking about. They don't just happen in one legislative session. Pushing for change in Olympia can take years or even decades. What do you think the legislature is going to be able to do this session, when it comes to undocumented workers, and talk about the pressure that I think needs to stay on the legislature, at least from your perspective, to make something like this happen?
So this is my first Washington State legislative session. So I am not going to accept that it takes 10 years to get something done, particularly when the need is so great and community has shown up every time to demand what they need, right? So to get that bill hearing for 5438, we had community really show up. And I think this session I know the bill is dead, but we're really pushing for this budget proviso for that $350 million and for a study so that we can figure out how to do a permanent unemployment system that includes undocumented folks. So yeah, we're maybe not 10 years, but 2 to 3 years to really get permanent unemployment system up and running, and working with state and community partnership on that.
Well, and Alizeh, maybe I can stay with you on this. The pandemic is going to have some lasting effects. I feel like this is part of the argument here, that undocumented workers are going to feel this for a while. They need this kind of continuing support. Is that where you're going with this?
Yeah. And as I said before, right, regardless of the recession, folks needed this before the pandemic, right? Unemployment is one of our basic social safety nets that everyone should have access to. And that's what we're fighting for, is just a basic social safety net.
Yeah, Paúl, maybe I can ask you about this. What do you think happens to this population of undocumented workers once this COVID aid runs out? I think this is part of the discussion here.
Yeah, I think what happens, it's obvious they'll be left on their own again. They'll be left having to rely on charity, on food banks that we have seen are also themselves under-resourced. And our community is going to have to start doing community fundraisers for themselves. And that's why what Alizeh is so important. We're going to get vaccinations, hopefully later this year, later this fall, and start heading back to work. But it's going to take some time for all of those jobs to come back online. People are going to find themselves in God knows how much debt. And so they need that ongoing support. While the pandemic, at least the public health impacts of it, may more soon or more immediately end, the economic impacts will stay here for a long time. And we need to make sure that people really shouldn't have to take to GoFundMe as a social safety net program. GoFundMe wasn't meant to be unemployment insurance, to be healthcare. We need our government to do its job. And that's why they need to act.
Okay, thank you for that. Alizeh, I wanted to talk a little bit more about immigration policy with you here. What to do about undocumented workers. This has been a heated debate topic on a national level for decades here. President Biden, as you know, recently introduced a major bill in Congress, the U.S. Citizenship Act. Discussions about this going on as we speak here. I'm trying to figure out if our state, looking at what our state's doing, what California is doing, for example, when it comes to undocumented workers, is this kind of state level action going to have a larger impact on federal immigration policy?
Washington State is going to be a leader and is already a leader in immigration policy. This relief fund that Paúl has been so instrumental, and all of these other community organizations have been so instrumental in setting up, have been a model for other states all around the country. So we're already seeing Washington State and the work that's being done here reflected on the national level. Additionally, our delegation, Senator Patty Murray, is third in leadership in the Senate. Representative Del Bene is the leader of the New Democrats, and Representative Jayapal is leader of the CPC, the Progressive Caucus. So Washington State has a lot of power, and our organizations have a lot of power to influence what's happening on that federal level. So yeah, Washington State, it's time.
Yeah. Paúl, your thoughts on this. What impact do you think the debate we're having about this in our state is going to have at a national level?
Yeah, I think Alizeh framed it really well. It took a lot of community pressure for the governor to act, and it's going to take a lot of community pressure for Congress to act. We know that we have a very slim majority, that Congress has failed our community before. Under President Obama, he also had control of both chambers, didn't deliver. And we have really, if we're being honest, a couple of months before politicians who are politicians start worrying about their next reelection. And so we need to make sure that they feel the pressure, especially the people in leadership that Alizeh mentioned, so they pass something in the coming months, and that they use tools like budget reconciliation, which are really up to Senator Murray and people in leadership to decide to use to push forth legalization, because people cannot wait for citizenship.
Thanks. I need to do the 30-second version here for our last answer if we can. I just want to wrap up with some final thoughts about undocumented workers, what our legislature has been working on this year, what needs to happen in the months, years ahead. Alizeh, some final words there when it comes to state lawmakers working on this. Other thoughts about the undocumented community?
Now that we're in a budget land, all I can say is that a budget is a moral document, and it shows what we value and who we value. So I really urge our legislators to have that political will to show and stand behind their talks of equity.
All right. Short version here, Paul, if you could, final thoughts. Paúl, excuse me.
No worries. I would say go big and be bold. Our community needs investment now. We can push also Congress to deliver, but we cannot wait for Congress to act. We need to deliver local relief.
Okay. All right. Thank you both for your input, and we will be right back. What are people on social media saying about this topic? One person writes, "One of the lessons we've learned during the pandemic is how interconnected we all are. Our ability to recover is going to depend on all of us recovering." Another writes, "Nearly 5 million undocumented essential workers place themselves and their families at risk each day to help keep the country safe amid COVID-19. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next time, an update from Olympia on a controversial capital gains tax proposal. Should state residents who make over $250,000 in profit on the sale of their stocks and bonds pay a new 7% tax? Or is that unconstitutional? We'll hear from both sides next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.